October went so quick for me that it feels like I literally just made a reading wrap-up video, so I was actually checking my calendar like 3 or 4 times to make sure that I was filming this in the right time. Honestly, where do the months go? And also, I can't believe we only have 2 months of 2025 left. That's literally sending me into psychosis. But that being said, it's time to do another monthly reading wrap-up, and I'm going to be telling you about the 6 books I read last month and what they're about, what I rated them out of 5 stars, and what I liked and disliked about them. Before I get into the reviews, this was not a good month of reading for me. I did have one 5-star book, which is the only saving grace of this video, if I'm being honest. Unless you like listening to me slag off books, then you're in the right place. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm Katarina. I make videos all about books, and if that's your jam, why not subscribe? Okay, so the very first book I read in October is a book that I have been excited about for a long time, since its release got announced, and that is Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. This is a fantasy novel that follows two rival PhD students at Cambridge University. They're both studying magic, and they're both very incredibly academically gifted. However, one day a forbidden spell goes horrifically wrong, where their professor ends up losing his soul and ends up going to the underworld. And these two students decide to literally descend to hell, and they're armed with nothing but their magic abilities and their wit. And I rated this 3 stars, which I was kind of gutted by because I was really hoping this was going to be 5 stars. I have a lot of thoughts on this book, but I'm going to try and keep it concise, otherwise this video would literally be over an hour long. Firstly, as always with things I liked, I thought this book had a very interesting premise. I think the plot as an idea was really cool. These two students, which finally aren't just teenagers but are actually young adults, are journeying through hell, is really interesting. I also thought that the novel was incredibly well researched. I liked the implementation of all these literary references to other people's works, such as Dante and Virgil and Milton and Socrates, along with lesser known works too. I also like that this book critiqued how academic institutions are quite rife with white old men. You know, everything is pale, stale, and male. Yes, people may argue that this is perhaps an overdone theme in all of her books, but I think that this novel particularly was important in showcasing how professors can exploit their students' work. However, this book missed quite a few things for me. Whilst the premise of this plot was cool, I think overall it was quite underwhelming. All the obstacles that this duo runs into all seem very miraculously easily solved, and whenever they're always in any real trouble, a third party always conveniently pops up to save the day. The main character in the story literally says 3 times throughout the entire book, "Could it be this easy?" Turns out it can. The plot for this also felt very dragged out. I felt like I was reading this book for a while. I don't think this needed to be 600 pages. And I'll be really real with you, I think the author's depiction of hell here was quite boring. There was nothing really new created here, apart from the 2 courts of the 7 deadly sins that we saw being quite original and cool. Nothing here was really that interesting or new. I felt like it was just recycling a lot of old stuff. It had no flair, or it didn't really include anything that I didn't already know about for hell. It wasn't also helped by the fact that the prose as well was really quite tedious. It just felt like a lot of information dumping. It felt like I was reading a textbook. There was a lot of chapters that were very long-winded, were overly wordy to explain a lot of things. Like, this book is meant to be an adventure. Show me, don't tell me. However, I think that my biggest grievance with this book is honestly the characters. Apart from this duo being the most obvious self-inserts of the author and her husband, like they even look the same, have the same flaws and everything, the characters themselves were just written in a way that was so dislikable. Like, even the main character herself, she was so insufferable. Even as someone who would describe herself as an academic girly, all of the choices and opinions that she had in this novel just didn't really make much sense to me, and it was just kind of boring to read about academia being her one true interest in life. It just felt very one-dimensional. Like, girl, we get it, you like to study, but what else? What other interests do you have? What friends do you have? What's your family like? What do you like to do outside of that? I get it, you're trying to show that our whole world revolves around academia, but this is honestly just kind of boring. Also, the dynamic between her and her rival was absolutely trash. The enemies to lovers arc between them just felt like a marketing ploy and did not feel authentic at all. The romance here honestly just felt like proximity that was kind of forced for us to believe that was intimacy. Overall, this book was okay. Like, for me, it was nothing really memorable in my opinion. Despite my very long-winded dislikes about this book, I do, however, think that this book is getting harsher criticism than it deserves. But I think because R.F. Kuang is such a talented writer, people put her on a much higher pedestal and expect higher standard of work from her. But I don't necessarily think this was a bad book. I think some of the reviews I've read are a little too negative. Like, it was all right. It's not maybe one I'd recommend to others. I would say to read her other works such as Yellowface and maybe Babel. They were two works I really enjoyed. Overall, I don't think this is a bad book. I think people rating it 1 stars are just being a bit dramatic, but I don't think this is amazing either. I think it's kind of mid, which is a shame because I was really looking forward to this book, but it just wasn't really one of my favorites. But swiftly moving on, the next book I read in October was Dead Poet Society by Nancy Kleinbaum. If you haven't seen the incredible film of this with Robin Williams, don't worry, I'll tell you what it's about. The story follows a group of boys who are studying at an elite school in the 1950s, and whilst the majority of their lessons are very conformist and dreary, their lives essentially change as they meet their new English teacher who encourages them to think for themselves and to seize the day through the use of poetry. However, these new attitudes clash with the school's traditional values and their parents' expectations. And before I give my rating, let me explain the context behind the book a little bit. This book was actually authored after the film's release as a novelization. Yes, such things exist. I did a lot of reading for this online to work out why this was made into a book, and essentially Touchstone Pictures granted copyright licenses to the studio's publishing partner called Bantam Books. They then hired this author to turn the screenplay into prose because the film was so successful. So it seemed like it was created for profit. Because the film did so well, they were like, hey, let's make a book as well and maybe this could sell also. And they got me because I well and truly loved the film, that I was like, I want more material. I want to read the book. And this may shock some of you, but I actually rated this book 0 stars. I gave it nothing because it may truly be the worst thing I've read all year. This is the classic case of capitalism ruining everything, because this book well and truly should not exist. Because not only was this just a money grab, I would maybe forgive it if the book was also as beautiful as the film, but the author completely butchered this. Even with all the original material she had all the visuals and all the dialogue, she could have done anything she wanted with this. She completely sucked the soul and spark from the story. The writing is awful, it's lifeless, it's boring, it felt like a complete drag to get through. In the film, which is props to the actors, the characters are so animated and full of feeling and emotion that you feel everything alongside them. But the book just gets rid of all that. It literally felt like reading a set of instructions. It was just, this boy did this boy did that, the teacher responded with that, this parent said this. Like, boring. And my biggest issue with this book is that the author wrote in additional chapters or scenes that honestly just ruins the characters. She gave them certain dialogue and behavior that made them just come across as very cringe and also misogynistic in some parts. And it was just behavior that went against their original characters and just kind of ruined the messaging of the story. I'll give you an example of which I found so unbelievable that I had to watch the film afterwards to make sure that this didn't actually happened, because I was so distraught by what I read. The English teacher, John Keating, who is played by Robin Williams, at one point makes all of his boys take a test, and whilst they're taking the test, on the projector, he shows them a photo of a naked woman throughout the whole duration, and with like tits out and everything. And he says that the point of this is that they can overcome distractions because women can sidetrack them in life. Sorry? You think that John Keating is gonna do that? Did we watch the same film? The only reasonable explanation for this is that the author hates Robin Williams, because what do you mean? This is nothing but slander. This book doesn't even deserve half a star in my opinion, because this wasn't even like her original story. All the material that she had to write with already existed. She came up with nothing herself. And the bits that she did come up with just ruined the original story. Like, what the hell? And to add insult to injury, I want you to look at the state of the book that I bought from eBay. You guys know that I buy the majority of my books from charity shops, but if there's a certain book that I really want to read, I will try and find a secondhand copy of it somewhere online. I couldn't actually believe this copy that came through my door. I don't know if you can see it, but the image resolution on that front cover is literally about 2 pixels. Like, someone had literally printed this themselves. They stapled it in completely the wrong place, so when I opened it up, it just ripped immediately. Like, how shocking is this? Like, I can't even make this up. I actually was just astounded when I bought this. I was like, what the hell? This was just the cherry on top of an abysmal experience. So, moving on from that abomination, I wanted to next pick up a book by an author I know and love in order to soothe myself from that disaster. So, the third book I read last month was mcglue by Ottessa. This story is set in the 1850s and we follow a drunken sailor called mcglue. And one day he wakes up in jail because he's been accused of murdering his close friend. However, his memory is non existent due to alcohol and various head injuries, so he can't actually recall what happened. So, we therefore follow fragments of his memory as he also swings between denial and confusion. And we explore themes in obsession, romantic attachment, and self destruction. And unfortunately, I didn't end up loving this book also, but I did give this 2 stars, which is probably not great in the grand scheme of things, but a lot better than the last book. But this kind of feels like a betrayal because I love Ottessa and I was really sad to rate this low, but this book just wasn't it. I'll be positive and start with things I liked. I liked the language in this book. It's very classic Ottessa. It's very moody and gritty and poetic. And she doesn't shy away from gross and TMI things, which is honestly the reason I love her. I also loved the plot being centered around drunk sailors. It felt very Pirates of the Caribbean to me, which is a hyperfixation I've had literally since I was 6 years old, so yay. However, the book overall just had a story that was very hard to follow and was therefore just not engaging. I don't know if this was done on purpose as like an unreliable narrator trope because he was drunk or hungover throughout the entire book, but everything in the book here just felt like a fever dream. I couldn't tell what was real and what was not, and it was all just borderline nonsensical. I really struggled to understand what was going on because there was a lot of time jumps and location jumps, and I couldn't tell if he was hungover then or drunk then, and I just couldn't tell if things were real or imaginary. And so it overall just felt like a hot mess. Plus, I know that this was set in the 1850s, but the main character was super racist and sexist that it became a bit of a bore to read. I also thought there was going to be some mad twist because we found out from the very start that his friend was murdered, so I thought there was going to be something else along the way, but there just wasn't. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say on this apart from it was just nonsensical and a bit boring. But this was Ottessa Moshfegh's first ever published book, so I'm not holding that against her. If you haven't read her work before and you don't know where to start, I would honestly recommend My Year of Rest and Relaxation and also Eileen. I think those two are like my favorite books from her. So, after 2 books, well, arguably 3 that I was quite disappointed by, you can bet that I was praying for my next book to be a banger because your girl was severely falling into a reading slump. And that book was Educated by Tara Westover. So, this is a memoir that's written by a woman who grew up in a very strict Mormon family in rural Idaho. And she grew up with parents that rejected formal education, modern medicine, and basically anything that even slightly involved the government. So, Tara grows up knowing very little about the real world around her and just believes everything that her dad has told her. However, she's driven by this curiosity for knowledge and learning more outside her immediate surroundings. So she secretly studies and takes tests in order to attend college, and she then goes on to higher education and goes to university until she ultimately obtains a PhD. And you will be absolutely delighted to know that this is the book I gave 5 stars to because this was truly phenomenal. I'm still speechless by this book, honestly. It honestly floored me. I read this book in 2 days. I probably would have read it in one day if I didn't have work, but it was so good I literally couldn't put it down. I'm trying to find the words to describe this book. I could tell you that it's eye-opening, inspirational, and transformative and shocking, but honestly, there are honestly no words to really fully describe the true weight of this book, but I'll try and give you some things that I personally liked about it. Firstly, it's incredibly well written. You can see that the author just has a natural talent for storytelling. Second, what this woman goes through is quite honestly unbelievable. This is really a story about resilience and transformation. Whilst this book is called Educated, and I think from the synopsis, it very much markets the power of education, I would honestly say that this book is more about surviving a abusive family, and in every sense of the words, physical, emotional, verbal. She grows up in a family that's so mistrusting of the entire world. Like, she grows up to believe that doctors are there to poison her and schools will brainwash her, and that any day the government's going to come and shoot them simply by existing off grid if the end of times don't come first. And it's incredibly brave for this woman to question her beliefs and to redefine herself by choosing another path, even when her family is all that she's ever known. You know, it's very easy to read it and think, oh, why doesn't this woman just cut them off? Like, she can obviously see that they're wrong. But it's hard cutting off family. I personally have family members that I don't speak to anymore, and I know other people that don't as well, but like there's always a part of you that kind of hopes they change. You don't want to completely cast them away because they're part of you at the end of the day. So I think anyone that kind of relates to that, or even just has a problematic family, will relate to this. Probably not in the same level as this, but because overall it's very much about balancing difficult family opinions with your own, which honestly I think anyone can relate to in any way. Like, I don't know anyone that sees strictly eye to eye with their parents. This was honestly incredible and just one of those books I would recommend anyone to read because it's just one of those stories that I think will just stay with you for life. For my fifth book I read last month, I actually went on holiday to Spain, and the place I was staying in had some books already there. One of which was The Housemaid by Freida McFadden, and I decided to pick it up because I know that it's popular and there's going to be a film adaptation of it coming out soon. So this is a psychological thriller that's centered around a young woman who has a criminal past, and she ends up taking up a housekeeping job for a very wealthy family on Long Island. The couple here on the outside seem perfect, but the longer she stays there, the more erratic the mother becomes, and also the more secretive the father becomes. And once she discovers their secret, she realizes it might be too late for her to escape. And even though I had low expectations going into this book already, it still surprised me how bad it was, and I gave this book 1.5 stars. This was just not a good book. And it continues to baffle me how bad books like these get made into film adaptations. And I'm looking at you, It Never Ends With Us. You were criminal, and I'm still mad because you were just abysmal. And guess what? I'm mad again at everyone rating this book so highly on Goodreads. Firstly, before even getting into the plot, the writing was awful. It felt like I was reading a book written by a young teenager who attempted to write a thriller novel. Like, everything just was just really dumb, but somehow attempted to be funny in like a slapstick cringe comedy way. The characters were so basic and annoying, everyone was just insufferable and predictable. But worst of all was the plot and just the sheer stupidity of it all. It started off fairly dumb, but alas, I thought I'd give it the benefit of the doubt. But I shouldn't have, because it just got dumber and dumber. It was so predictable that I guessed the twist right at the start, and I remember even thinking, surely it can't be that because that's just too obvious. Anyone that says that this plot was unpredictable, grow some brain cells, because I am truly speechless at some people who said they didn't see this coming. I can literally only pray that Hollywood do something different with the film, because I feel as though that this story has been repeated so many times in other films. But then again, they casted Sydney Sweeney, so I don't have high hopes for the film. I do not recommend reading this at all. Just avoid it at all costs if you can, because it will not only waste your time, but it will leave you mad, like I am afterwards. So just avoid. And finally, the last book I read in October, because I was still in Spain and I wanted to read something set in the Mediterranean, was Greek Lessons by Kang. So upon reading this book, I found out that it wasn't actually set in the Mediterranean, but that's fine because I've been wanting to read this book for a while anyway. The novel follows two main characters. The first is a woman that loses her ability to speak after experiencing several big losses in her life. And we follow her as she decides to enroll in ancient Greek language classes. And the second character is the teacher who teaches these classes, who is actually losing his eyesight but is drawn to her silence. The book shifts between their perspectives, but we essentially follow their struggles and loneliness and finding solace within each other through the use of language. And I rated this book 2.5 stars. It's not been a great month of reading, has it? Again, starting off with things I liked, because we're not always doom and gloom. Firstly, I do like this author for the way she writes incredibly poetically. You can tell there's always a deeper meaning behind her words, which is always nice to meditate on. And it's one of the main reasons I loved her other works, like The Vegetarian and also Human Acts. I thought they were both great. Previously, she also tends to dive into societal commentary, but I didn't really see much of that here. But I did really like her exploration into how isolating disabilities can be, especially being blind and mute. It sheds light on struggles that I luckily have the privilege to have never have experienced or considered. Although saying that, I am having laser eye surgery next month, and I do have a bit of a fear that it will go wrong and I'll go blind. So this book did low-key kind of stress me out when I was reading it, but that's besides the point. However, on a whole, I just didn't find this book that enjoyable to read, not because of the laser eye thing. I think personally it was just too abstract for my liking. I do like poetic books, but there is a fine line when one too many metaphors can render the book to be nonsensical. Whilst there were some parts of the book I really enjoyed, there were a lot of other parts I found it very hard to follow and even just understand what was actually going on. And one of the things that really heavily contributed to this is that the chapters alternated between the two main characters, but it never really made it clear who was narrating each chapter. So you'd have to read a page or two to kind of work out who was narrating it. And I hate when authors do this. It is so frustrating and it puts me off reading it because I feel lost and I don't want to have to go back and repeat what's happened to work out who's narrating. Sometimes I would literally get through half a chapter and I thought that one person was speaking and then I'd realize, oh wait, no, it's actually the other person that's speaking. And I'm just like, this is annoying. I don't want to have to go through this. Just put at the start of the chapter who's talking or give me some indication who's speaking. It's doubled with the fact that this is so abstract, it's so hard to follow. And also this is coupled with the fact that it's exploring ancient Greek, which I don't know about you, is a language I don't know. I did consider if this was a translation issue, who I think Deborah Smith translated this, but she translated her other works as well into English and I both loved those. So I just think it was just the book itself I was just not really a big fan of. I have loved other books from this author, but this one I was just quite lukewarm about, and I would recommend you to read other books from this author instead. And those were all the books I read last month. In terms of my personal life, October was actually a very heavy holiday month for me. At the very start of the month, me and my boyfriend visited his family at the Wirral, which is a place near Liverpool if you're not from the UK. And then we drove up to North Wales for a little weekend away, and as you can see, the autumn weather was hitting hard. I like nature to a certain extent, but unlike me, he loves hiking in the wilderness, so we went on various walks and hikes the entire time. I actually haven't visited Wales before, so this was fun for me to appreciate a lot more of their rural landscapes, even with the weather being so cold. Not long after, I then actually flew to Spain for a holiday with my parents for around 2 weeks, where the weather was actually very sunny and warm, thank God. I actually had no annual leave left for the entire time I was there, so I was remotely working the entire time, but I didn't really mind because I managed to catch the sun during my lunch breaks and after work. I did also get ill with COVID whilst I was there, so this was my view for a couple of days or so. I literally got back to the UK a couple of days ago and the weather is miserable here, but it's also just been Halloween, which is my favourite holiday. In terms of films I rewatched Dead Poet Society because I honestly felt like I was getting gaslit by the book that certain things happened when they didn't, so I rewatched that. And to my sheer relief, it still continues to be an incredible film and one of my favourites of all time, honestly. Robin Williams is just such a comfort actor to me, and the story in that film is just chef's kiss. I also watched Maestro with Bradley Cooper in it, and it's good, but it's just incredibly Oscar bait. The actors in it were the best bit. They were all incredible and it felt so real, but the way the film was shot was just really boring. It just wasn't engaging. You'd have these really long scenes with one camera really far away, and I don't know, it was quite hard to just like get easily distracted by other things. And there you have it. That was my October summed up in one video. Let me know in the comments what your October was like, and also please tell me your favourite reads from the last month. Did you read any spooky stories with Halloween coming up, or have you just read general autumn reads, or are you not a seasonal reader like I am? If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out, and if you're new here, please subscribe. I make new videos chatting all things about books. Feel free to also follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update what books I read in real time, and I also have an Instagram. I do post some personal things on there, but I also post the books I've read, letting you know what about, and also what I rated them out of 10. Sending lots of love to my returning subscribers who continuously watch and support me. I see you all and I love reading your comments. It's genuinely so rewarding. Thank you so much for watching. Please pray for me that my laser eye surgery goes well and I do not end up blind, because that would really quite hinder my reading process. With that being said, love you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.